Welcome to the American Institute of Healthcare Professionals videogram on temperaments and morality. And this is for Christian counseling. And it's important to understand a person's psychological makeup when counseling and helping individuals from a pastoral standpoint, because one can then better understand their naturally inclined strengths and weaknesses. Because as we all know, the Holy Spirit does bless individuals with certain gifts. Some of these gifts allow individuals to have greater spiritual insight in some things than others. And of course, those without certain gifts may be less inclined to do certain things. And this doesn't make one better than the other. It's just a natural spiritual temperament towards a certain way of acting in the social setting. So it's important, I think, as a counselor, to identify a person's temperament to better understand what makes them tick and how they respond and what they're more inclined to react to. So what is temperament? Temperament is a natural, as I stated, inclination of a person's personality. So individuals are born with certain temperaments. It's more of a nature thing. This doesn't mean that a temperament is an excuse for certain bad behavior or that it takes away one's free will, but it does illustrate certain inclinations to certain behaviors, both vices and also virtues. So how one grieves, reacts to stress, becomes angry, or responds to various social interactions depends heavily upon one's particular temperament. And of course, this type of temperament is something that is not going to change throughout the person's life, unlike personality, which is more fluid. So there are 4 types of temperaments: choleric, sanguine, melancholic, and phlegmatic. And one usually possesses also a secondary temperament. Now, there's a variety of personality tests that take place where there are variations within the 4 temperaments, which lead to the various 16 possible types of personalities that are exhibited in many individuals. Now, the first temperament I referenced was choleric. Now, a choleric temperament is something that is responsive and has a lasting response to stimuli. So it's responsive very quickly, but the response isn't just temporary, but it lasts a long time. It makes an imprint on an individual. So choleric individuals naturally are more outgoing, very goal orientated. They like to lead, and they also like to dominate situations. Hence, they make great leaders, innovators, and also managers. But there are negative components to a choleric. A choleric can be selfish, egotistical. They may lack empathy or what others are going through. They can become easily frustrated and angry at failure. And they can be also, if not properly nurtured, open to narcissistic tendencies. Choleric temperaments need guidance at an early age to learn to show compassion and patience. Other balancing temperaments that an individual might have as a secondary help reduce some of these negative aspects. Now, saintly individuals who have a choleric personality always aligned their goals to be refocused on building God's kingdom on earth. So obviously individuals like St. Paul or St. Ignatius Loyola are great examples of choleric personalities that were leaders, and they used that energy and that managerial skill to bring forth glory and honor to God's name on earth. Sanguine is a secondary type of temperament I listed of the main 4. This second temperament is one that is more outgoing, extroverted, and pleasure seeking. So when we look at the stimuli response, a sanguine is more responsive, but that response is more fleeting. It doesn't last as long as a choleric. So because of that, sanguine can be a very fleeting and irresponsible type of individual, and they can have also a tendency towards too much fun from a hedonistic perspective in search of excessive pleasure. So this type of temperament, if a child portrays a sanguine type temperament, this type of temperament needs to be grounded and aimed to the spiritual more so than the physical. And this type of temperament also needs to be given denial at a young age to help curb its excessive appetite. Other than that, though, from a positive perspective, sanguine is very good at forming relationships, friendships, and also look to help others. They're also very fun to be around, and also in terms of sharing good times. The third temperament is melancholic. Now, melancholic temperaments do not respond as quick to stimuli, but they do ponder and think about it from a more introvert standpoint. So this temperament is more emotional and also more intuitive in its very nature. They are very good listeners, and they also have empathy for others. However, from the negative point of view, it can be more prone to isolation, sadness, and various depressions. It is also very indecisive. So when spiritual, this can lead, when we're looking at an emotional, intuitive individual, it can lead to a very beautiful and insightful prayer life with a relationship to God. But when spirituality does not exist, when there is a void of God in one's life, one can easily, who has a melancholic temperament, can fall into despair, lack of hope in others, and also very long to forgive and forget past wrongs within a situation. So melancholic temperaments hence need encouragement and emotional support to properly form with the spiritual necessities with it. And there are many saints who had very delicate hearts that were very introverted in themselves, but also very intuitive, very spiritual, very mystic. And because of this tender heart, and because it was aimed towards God, brought forth great and beautiful writings and wisdom about knowing and becoming closer to God through contemplation. The final temperament is phlegmatic, and a phlegmatic temperament is an introvert in itself. So one is not responsive to stimuli at all. So this temperament is not easily excited and prefers a more quiet and thinking type environment. However, this temperament is also very patient, very thoughtful, easygoing, and also passive. This temperament tends to work well with others, but one problem is if it's not properly stimulated, it can become more isolated, lazy, and lack motivation in itself. So at a young age, it needs to be re-stimulated and pushed out of its shell, these types of individuals. They need to be pushed towards the awesome act of love from a spiritual perspective of God, and they need to feel the need to share the gospel as good disciples. So all of these temperaments, again, help us understand our natural inclinations. They're long withstanding within us. They're natural parts of ourselves. And while some have negative aspects, many also have positive aspects. And more than less, they also are accompanied by secondary temperaments that create various different personalities. And personality is a much more fluid part of our very self and how we express ourselves in public. So it's very important, as the philosopher says, to know thyself. So as a more fluid movement, and we look at it, we see various temperaments and also our various characters. And our character is something that is influenced through our biology, our social interaction, our psychological development, and also our moral upbringing. So nature and nurture play a key role in our character, which in turn with our temperament gives us what we would refer to as our personality. So understanding oneself and others' temperaments help one understands one's strengths and weaknesses in moral life. So as a spiritual director, a spiritual advisor, or a spiritual mentor, it is important to understand your spiritual daughter or son and in the progress within their spiritual life. And one way to have a good tab, a good understanding of where they are spiritually and morally, is to understand their temperament. to understand their history of their character and how their personality plays out. And in that way, we can have a better understanding of one's natural spiritual gifts and how easily they may come, as opposed to other things that may be harder to cultivate in the life of virtue, which is habitual. So certain individuals may need more help in certain areas than others. And again, I like to emphasize that no temperament is superior to the other. They all have their negatives and their various positives. So we offer here at AIHCP a Christian counseling certification. The link is below. Our number is 330-652-7776, and our email is info@aihcp.org. I hope from a Christian counseling perspective, this video on understanding what temperaments are is helpful in helping Christian counselors and directors and spiritual advisors help their spiritual children better have a Christian formation within their own spiritual life itself. I'd like to thank you for listening and have a good day.